Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Achieve Optimal Data Protection with Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365. Special thanks to DataPrize and Veeam for supporting us on the event today. Before we get started, there's a few things that you should know about the webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We always want these events here at Actual Tech to be educational, and we encourage your questions. I know so many of you out there are dealing with data protection challenges. We'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so keep those questions coming. We even have a Best Questions prize to help further encourage some questions. I'll talk about that more here in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention to the Handouts tab. There's some excellent resources available there for download. I encourage you to check those out. And at the end of the webinar, it'll be my pleasure to announce the winner of our Amazon $250 gift card. If you're watching this on demand or recorded, of course, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our Best Question prize for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. The prize winner will be selected based on those who ask questions during the event, and we'll be contacting the prize winner after the webinar. All prize winners must meet the terms and conditions found in the Handouts tab. All right, with that housekeeping information out of the way, it's now time to welcome today's expert presenters. I'm glad to have Greg Jones, who's the Vice President of Microsoft Alliances at DataPrize, Marty Williams, who's a Senior Solutions Architect at Veeam, and Mary Beth Hamilton, Chief Marketing Officer at DataPrize. Greg, Marty, and Mary Beth, it's great to have you on. I'll first hand it off to you, Mary Beth. Take it away.
Thanks, David. We're excited to be here. So before we get into the great content, I just wanted to share a little bit about who DataPrize is and why we are having this conversation with one of our favorite partners here, Veeam. So DataPrize is a managed service provider that supports our clients end-to-end, from supporting their managed IT services, but more applicably to the conversation we are having today, we support them with their journeys to the cloud. We support them while they are there. And then we also deliver industry-leading DRaaS and BaaS services for business resiliency. So we are incredibly proud to be a Veeam Platinum partner. This is sort of a brag slide of all the competencies that we have across Veeam. We're also proud to have our own Veeam Vanguard on our team, as well as being a Microsoft Gold partner and a managed partner with Microsoft. So between these two, we work deeply in providing Veeam-powered data protection services to our clients, as well as protecting their Azure environments. So with that, let me share a little bit about what we are going to be covering today. So for the agenda, we're going to talk briefly about the state of the market and cloud trends. We're then going to talk about how we are seeing organizations protect their data in Azure, both from their Azure backup strategy, as well as Microsoft 365 backup strategy. And then if you haven't fully embraced migration to Azure yet, we're just going to talk briefly about what that type of move looks like and what you need to be thinking about to support your organization in that transition. So first off, let's talk about what is going on in the market in terms of cloud adoption trends. So setting the stage for this conversation, we want to take a look at the fact that public cloud usage continues to increase. And as validation of that, there was a recent study done of 700 plus IT professionals that took a look at their use of cloud, be that public cloud, private cloud, or hybrid. And what that found is that enterprises, which tend to have more complex environments, are moving a bit more slowly to the public cloud, but they are fully moving there in multiple instances. So about 50% of their workloads are in the public cloud, and probably 48% of the data is in the public cloud. But what this shows is that they're embracing a hybrid cloud approach. Additionally, for SMBs, they're moving a little bit more quickly to the public cloud, but we're also seeing that continues to be a hybrid methodology that they are utilizing, both public, private, and on-prem. Then on the right-hand side here, and particularly relevant to this conversation, are what type of public clouds platforms are they moving to? And at the top of the list there, we see Azure, which is a key component of why we're having this conversation. And so last year from this study, Azure was the first time that the adoption rate surpassed one of their top competitors. But regardless of that platform, we are continuing to see that a preference towards hybrid and public cloud is going to drive forward. So pulling Veeam into this, and a study that Veeam had done on this topic is taking a look at how do you estimate your organization's percentage of servers in each format currently, and what percentage in the 2 years time. And what you'll see here also is that solid trend towards moving things from on-prem into the cloud, and that hybrid infrastructure is here to stay. So using that to set the stage and recognizing that we continue to see this drive towards Azure adoption, Greg, I wanted to bring you into the conversation to talk about why are organizations gravitating towards the public cloud, but for this conversation, Azure. So over to you, Greg.
Oh, sure, be glad to. And I'll probably pick three of these, but there's a lot of information here that's worth reviewing. The first one we see a lot of times is how do I reduce my cost of risk? We see a lot of folks moving to the cloud because there's enhanced security tools that they can take advantage of and enhance their security requirements around their operation. Another big one we see is the IT administration. A lot of times we hear folks say, well, if I move to the cloud, you know, what happens to my staff that's managing my IT blinky lights, if you will? And what we find over and over again is 100% of these companies redeploy this staff to do what we find more, meaningful IT kinds of work, right? They're no longer managing the blinking lights, sliding cards in and out of servers, things like that. They're actually doing real value add things to the organization. And then if you get into the accounting, the CFO, the financial administration of the organization, you find CapEx to OpEx is a big driver. Now they got a very much predictable monthly cash flow requirement for their IT operations rather than the big, hey, IT's requesting $2.3 million for an upgrade and everybody hiccups, right? So that's sort of the three I like to focus on.
Perfect. So good segue into the meat of this conversation, and it's how organizations can adapt their data protection strategies for Azure using backup as a service. But before we get into that, this is always an important one for us to talk about, is that as it says at the top of the slide, you still need backup and data protection with Azure. It just changes how you think about things in your strategy. So Greg, what do you tell clients about this as part of their strategy and their Azure strategy?
Just create a theme. It's your data, and you're always responsible for your data no matter where it resides. You don't get to hand off that responsibility because you go to the cloud. You still own the data, you still have responsibility for it. So that's sort of my theme when it comes to backup.
So Marty, I am sure you touch on this with clients all the time as well. Sort of what's your talk track on this?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that, I kind of get tired of, and I'm sure everybody else does too, since COVID, right? But honestly, it's true. We've seen more of the distributed workforce, right? Where now more people are working from home, more people are working remotely. But at the end of the day, the data, whether the data resides in a server in a closet, in a server in Azure, or on a laptop that's home, it's the company's data. And honestly, that data is considered an asset to the business, right? So the business value is the data that resides for that business. So no matter where it resides, you need to make sure that you're protecting it, you're backing up, and you have the ability to recover that in the case of a disaster or just, a laptop dying and, hard drive getting crashed.
Perfect. So keeping the spotlight on you, Marty. So the other one is, DataPrize uses Veeam to deliver our backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. And there's a lot of capabilities that Veeam brings to that. So if you can sort of talk us through that, that would be great.
Yep. So Veeam has the native backup for Azure. So that's a key component, because what we're doing there is we're actually taking advantage of Azure's native tool set, APIs to do snapshot-based backups. So I don't have to be running an agent inside that VM, right? I'm not disruptive to the VM itself. I'm taking a snapshot at the basically like a hypervisor level, right? So I'm getting it at the Azure level. And then I can run that independently. So if I'm 100% Azure native, then I can do a 100% Azure native backup with Veeam. If I'm doing a hybrid approach, like you talked about, like a lot of companies are, where I've got some on-prem or some in some other location, if that's a private hosted cloud, then I can run the normal Veeam tool set of the Veeam backup and replication. And the great thing about it is you'll notice in that slide, way over in the corner there, it's got that little big A, right? Because we can connect those two together. So that now that hybrid approach not only works for my running workloads, but for my backup as well. So that I can take advantage of Veeam Backup for Azure with Veeam Backup and Replication and have the ability to manage it, monitor it, and recover across various platforms when I combine the two together.
That is a pretty powerful dynamic. And so building on and getting a little bit deeper, because we were talking about, backup strategies. And one question that I wanted to pose is, so what are we seeing in terms of how organizations are deciding whether they're doing backup with Azure workloads within Azure only, or taking that hybrid / multi-cloud data protection approach? Marty, do you want to answer this one first? And then Greg, I'll have you jump in on it and what you're seeing.
Sure. So, I hear this conversation a lot like, hey, we're running on-prem today, we're moving to Azure, and we're going all in on Azure, so I only need to worry about backing up in Azure. And that may be the case today, but, today you've made that decision. Who's to say tomorrow or a year from now you don't make the decision to switch and do something different, go back on-prem, or maybe there's just a better way to run something. So, backing up it with Azure and those workloads in Azure, it's key to have the portability, right? Just like it is today with our on-prem backups with Veeam, the portability of being able to move that workload either to another Azure region or location or data center, or back on-prem or to another private hosted cloud or another hyperscaler cloud, right? Because who's to say that something doesn't occur with a ransomware attack or something to that nature? So it's a very good idea to have a hybrid approach, not only to running workloads, but also to backing up and recovering workloads.
And to add to that, Mary Beth, we hear this at Data Prize a lot. Marty described it. There's lots of options. So most of the time we sit down with the customer and say, let's talk about your plan from a holistic perspective. And then let's talk about the needs as we move through that plan, right? So Marty's right. Typically it's a combination, but generally it's client based. So
yeah, and one thing I heard there is the ability to recognize that while we try to lay out the best strategy today, it could change, and to be able to build that contingency in there and have the flexibility to be able to adapt your strategy as your business continues to evolve. So with that, Marty, can you talk us through more about why BAS for Microsoft Azure?
Sure. Well, and I love the fact that the first one we touch on is simplicity, right? So the idea with Veeam's backup for Azure is it is a very simple policy-based backup tool where I can add the instances that are running in Azure based on a certain policy. So if they're tagged or the resources are set up a certain way, I can set that policy up and then I can run that policy as frequently as I want to, right? So it's very simple. It's all UI driven in a web-based access. I can turn things on, set them up, say I want to do snapshots every hour. I want to do backups once a day. You have that ability to do that based on policy. And then going into the next one is that fast and flexible recovery, right? So we've talked about that one as well already, that the ability for Veeam is I can actually do a replication across zones. So, all right, I can replicate an Azure zone from the east to west coast, and then I can fail it over with Veeam. I have the ability to do backups and recoveries in Azure. And again, those are very fast because we're basically doing like a snapshot and then a snapshot recovery. And then I have the ability to do a full-blown backup where Veeam is taking that, writing it into a Veeam format, which gives me that flexible recovery back on-prem. I can take an Azure backup, recover it in VMware if I need to, right? So I have that capability. And then the last part of that puzzle is the low cost. So one of the things that's great with Veeam is that as we run through the policy and I set that policy up, before I actually click the button to say, yes, do this, it gives me a cost calculator that says, based on the choices you picked, how many times, how often you snapshot, where you store those snapshots, and how often you do a backup and where you're storing that backup, it'll give you an estimated cost of what that looks like. And so it'll show you, hey, based on what you chose, it's going to cost you this. Then you have the choice. Well, I can either say, well, I don't necessarily need that frequent of snapshots. I can reduce my cost. Or if I do, at least I can say up front, hey, management, you told us we had to do snapshots every hour. Here's what it's going to cost us to do that. Right. So it kind of gives you that approach.
So that is one from the cost savings perspective and the ability to optimize costs within backup that I wanted to dig into a little bit deeper, because not only does it have implications on an organization's backup strategy, there are the aspects that it has implications on their Azure strategy as well across the organization. And as we work with our clients to migrate them to Azure and then support them in Azure, that is one thing that we're consistently working with them on. So, Greg, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how can an organization confidently forecast their workloads and then optimize to have the most cost-effective strategy, but also most optimized strategy within Azure.
Well, you said it right there. You've got to spend some time. We typically sit down with the organization, understand their business model, understand their configurations, where they're looking to go, and we sit down, forecast the costs associated with that, forecast, take a look at the data requirements and workloads, and then we'll optimize the not only the Azure environment, the backup strategy as well. So it's a it's really a sort of a collaborated effort. It's not just a, hey, pick option 7 and you're good to go. It's, let's sit down and let's look at it from a holistic perspective. Then let's look at target pieces of your data to make sure we have everything covered.
And then I know that you always like to say that, we get them there and then it's an iterative process to make sure that we have it right sized ongoing.
Right. Yes.
So, Marty, bringing you back in, talking a little bit more about some of the advantages here of a Veeam-powered BAS solution. And of course, I like to say that people consume from Dataprise.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you can consume it from Dataprise, and it's great that you have the ability to get it from a managed provider. So definitely, like some security and compliance reasons, like role-based access controls. So I don't have people getting in and accessing things that they shouldn't access, right? Another key thing that I like is the cross subscription, right? So a lot of times, me as a customer, I have my subscription to Azure and I have my controls, but then I can actually use a different subscription. For example, Dataprise can have their own subscription and controls accounts and have access to back up my account as a customer. And that way there, what happens is if my account as a customer gets corrupted or ransomware attacked, my backups are sitting in a different account, which is just another delineation of separation, right? So that I don't have to worry about that account getting corrupted. My backups sit in a different account. So that's another great way to protect me from cyber threats and bad actors, as well as have some compliance pieces there as well. And then again, the key component there is that one platform, right? So we hear this all the time, like I want one pane of glass, I want one throat to choke, I want to be able to call one place, right? So this is again, going into that mobility and that flexibility where Veeam can protect those on-prem workloads, those Azure workloads, and be that one platform across. And I have visibility to see that through my service provider like Dataprise, right? And then I already covered on that with the mobility of being able to go across if I need to.
Yeah, and the one thing that, the one choke to throat, we like to say the one hand's a high five, but, leading into us being that single partner and then taking Veeam's one platform and being able to build it into our single pane of glass for reporting is something that, we really view as a powerful enabler and differentiator for our clients, that we can take the best of what Veeam is doing and then integrate it into a additional single pane of glass where they can get all that visibility and capability across their environment. So
Yeah, and let me touch a little bit more on that too, because one of the things that is key when I look at everything across and I get back into that cloud mobility is the way Veeam licenses it, even through the service providers, is the license is also portable. So when I say I'm protecting a workload with Veeam and I'm backing that workload up, if I turned around and recovered that workload into a different location, that license moves with it. So I don't have to worry about going back in and, oh, I'm protecting my VMware infrastructure and I'm recovering to Azure and now I've got to relicense my backup tool. You don't have to do that. The license is portable and moves along with the workload. So again, just goes into that flexibility and that mobility and visibility that it just moves along with wherever that workload resides.
excellent. So we've spent some time talking about protecting data in Azure. Now let's talk specifically about Microsoft 365 and backup strategies there. So one of the reasons we're having this conversation, and we're going to get deeper on the next slide, is that the cyber attacks targeting Microsoft 365, as an example, continue to rise. And this puts the spotlight on why it's so incredibly important to have a modern data protection strategy that protects you from, recovering data, and particularly protects you in times of cyber attacks. So as noted here, 80% of cyber attacks target Office applications. That's why on that right-hand side here, that bar is incredibly out to the right with 80%. And then, there are other items that come through. We know phishing attacks continue to rise and become more sophisticated, as well as malicious link phishing. So each one of these highlight that Microsoft 365 environment is a huge target and a huge potential point of weakness for organizations, and highlight why it's so incredibly important to protect it. So I wanted to come over and, building off of that cyber threats component, highlight additional risks facing 365 data. So Marty, if you can kick us off and cover some of your favorite ones here to talk about, and then Greg, we'll have you jump in and talk about some as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously accidental deletion, right? We've all done that. We've all, especially now with, devices, right? On my phone or my iPad, it's very easy to accidentally, I'm reading my email and falling asleep on the couch and I accidentally touch it with my thumb and delete, right? It literally is that simple. It's one of my favorite ones. It happens all, not to me, but like, my wife's like, hey, what's this thing on my phone, right? She fell asleep and touched it with her thumb. The other one is the external security threats. That's a great thing that you showed that slide, right? Because one of the things that doesn't matter, if you think about browsers, right? I might be using Chrome or Firefox or Safari or who knows whatever browser, but a majority of people use 365, right? To have Office on their computer, even a Mac, right? If I'm running a Mac, I'm probably running Office 365 for my corporate email. So again, that the threat against that product is much higher. And again, it goes back to the data is the company's data, right? So even inside of M365, the company email, OneDrive, SharePoint, it all belongs to that company. So I look at that as an external threat, is a key component to protect against, and then retention policy gaps. M365 does have the ability to store things a certain way, and they can do that. But where Veeam actually comes in is that retention policy gaps, is we can make sure that data is stored for as long as you need it, and can be recovered in a way that you need it. So those are my key ones that I like to talk about, and I'll let Greg talk about some of his.
Sure. The big one I like to look at is legal and compliance requirements. A lot of organizations don't realize if they're doing business with healthcare, they've got some compliance requirements there. They've got HIPAA, right? Even in payroll, in HR, you've got compliance requirements with employee data. So we find organizations, they say, hey, I've got a contract with this state government. I'm doing some work for those guys. Well, there's some compliance requirements there that they need to be aware of. Probably not There's tools and capabilities built in 365 to help you manage and monitor that. But first and foremost, you got to be aware of what those legal compliance requirements are. You've got to ask the scary question: are we at risk doing business with this customer because we have this data? The answer is you probably are. So you need to go and figure out what your legal and compliance requirements are. That's a big one. Hybrid email deployments, migration to 365. Those are fun projects to do because we love to see people come together on a single platform. You got a lot of risk in those because you're picking up identities and mail from locations that you may not be aware that they've got some issues with. So that's one you got to spend some time doing some homework on to make sure you've got everything in order before you come to that single platform. So I guess that's my two, if you will.
So Marty, why don't you talk us through what Veeam is enabling us to do here with M365 backups?
Sure. So infrastructure freedom, right? That's the key one. Is that with Veeam's backup for 365, we allow you, whether it's the customer themselves or a service provider such as Dataprise, and have that capability, they're allowed to choose the platform they want to use, whether that be, physical servers, virtual servers, cloud-based servers, what the storage is. So it truly gives the most flexibility of how to do the backups and where to land those backups, right? And then backup control, again, I have that capability to do different policy-based controls. And I can even use that by groups. Like what I see a lot of people do is, certain groups have certain requirements, whether that be the C-suite executives have one policy and what their backup looks like, and then, regular users. So I have that granular flexibility of how I want to run those backups, how long I need to store them. Going back to Greg's point on the compliance, right? Certain people in the company have a different compliance requirement than others as far as storing that data and how long to hold on to it. Me personally, I like the recovery flexibility, right? That's one of my favorites is I can go in and recover an individual email and put it back, right? Again, going into the accidental deletion, I can call up and say, hey, I accidentally deleted this email. I need it back. You can go in and recover it, put it back, and then I rescan my inbox, and there it is. I have the ability to recover everything as a PST file if I need to, right? An employee leaves, and I need that requirement, but for whatever compliance reasons or legal reasons, I can recover it as a PST file on a USB stick and hand it to the manager and say, hey, here's all the emails from XYZ person, and here's everything. And then again, scalable recovery, right? I have the ability to do bulk recoveries of everything from a whole folder, a whole SharePoint site, a Teams chat. We have that capability as well. So all of those things are very key and part of what the strength of Veeam's backup can provide.
Excellent. So thought I was going to flip over to some plugs, but I'm not yet. Marty, I'm going to let you keep talking about the benefits of BAS and the increased control it provides.
So the backup control with BAS, tenants can create the backups on their own, or you have something like Dataprise where they can manage it end to end for you, right? So again, one of the reasons why some companies went to M365 is they don't want to manage an Exchange server anymore. They don't want to manage SharePoint. All right, so then they think, okay, well now I've got to manage my backups. Well, I got rid of the management of the infrastructure and the servers. I don't want to manage the backups either. So I have the capability to go to a service provider like Dataprise and let them manage it for me. They can create the policies, they can do the recoveries, and I have, again, that capability and flexibility with the Veeam backup, right? And that tenant autonomy. So the organizations can restore their own data, or they can rely on their service provider. And again, that's where we see a trend is most companies wanting to go to that service provider, let the service provider handle it for them, just like a help desk, right? I call them up, hey, I got this recovery, I've got this that I need to be done. And again, going back to Greg's point way early on, that allows your IT team to do the functions that benefit the company, right? We all know restoring data and restoring emails, restoring SharePoint is all part of business that has to happen. But is that the key function that keeps the business running or grows the business or moves into a new area for the company, right? That allows that IT team to be more strategic by utilizing a service provider to do that for us. And again, that easy adoption, leveraging a BAS provider allows that to be much easier. Onboard billing, again, that control, simplified setup, simplified billing with a service provider, perfect fit.
And then that's the perfect segue just to sort of visualize how Dataprise, as an example, delivers this service to our clients and taking that data from that Microsoft 365 environment, using Veeam's technology to send it into the cloud repository, and then having it available to easily recover and restore should any of those scenarios that we previously touched on occur. Greg, anything you want to add here?
No, but I think the picture's great, Mary Beth, because that allows you to really see what's going on with your data, right? I'm over here, as Marty says, doing my work, and the service providers managing the backup and recovery of my data. My IT folks are doing the real things that are value add to the business. So I think this is a great picture.
And it really is that simple.
It is.
So we talked a lot about, we started with talking about, the trends and that we are seeing more and more organizations leverage Azure within their infrastructure. We then talked about how if you are using Azure today, how you can protect and better back up that data for resiliency and the advantages of working with a Veeam powered BaaS solution, such as that delivered by Dataprise. We then talked about Microsoft 365 and how organizations need to have the appropriate backup strategies in place. And I wanted to round out the conversation of talking a bit more about if an organization today may only be using using Microsoft for Microsoft 365 and haven't fully embraced Azure, or maybe they just have a small aspect of their organization that they're using for it and contemplating a wider migration. Greg, I was hoping you could take us through what does that framework look like as you're either starting or continuing on your Azure migration journey, and how can organizations get there confidently? So I will stop and turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll take a high level walkthrough. The key thing is read the bottom line. We've done more than 1,000 Indian Azure migrations with this methodology. We actually developed this methodology with Microsoft, the Cloud Adoption Framework, a number of years ago. So it's been tried and true. It works well. Typically, when people say, I'm sort of excited about coming to this cloud, tell me what we have to do. First thing we do is sort of assessment of their current environment. We take a look at what all they have and with the customer sit down and say, does all this necessarily need to go to the cloud? And what we find a lot of times, there's stuff out there that they didn't even really realize they have, right? And so we start cleaning up, getting what we consider sort of an optimal kind of model. Then we deploy the foundations, migrate the data up. We do a little bit of optimization. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second. But here's what we like about it. In Dataprise, when we put you in the cloud, it's secured, it's protected, and we can offer the fully managed services. So basically, your IT staff that did the blinky lights kinds of stuff now gets to go do real things for the business. And Marty alluded to that just a little bit earlier. But what we want to look at here is it isn't just 6 blocks and we're done, or 7 blocks, six I guess it is. Let's go to the optimization. I like to sort of say 7 because I like to have it at the end as well because we need to come back. Okay, it's a 30, 60, 90 day look at what we've got up in the cloud. Now let's tune it to where it runs effectively and efficiently in the cloud, cost effectively. But that's an always ongoing process, right? We have tools we deploy leaving the cloud so we can constantly monitor cost optimizations. We look at ways to say, look, you said you need solid state drives, but when we're looking at the performance of this, you can save a lot of money if you go to this, the spinning drives, for example, things like that. So we spend a lot of time with the clients continually tuning their systems, optimizing their systems. So what we find is initially when they come into the cloud, everybody says, I want to save a lot of money. Maybe not on round one, but when we start optimizing your cloud, you're going to see some significant savings. And we've got case studies around that, so we're glad to share those. But it's an exciting journey, and it allows you to do your business instead of being IT focused in part of your business, if that makes sense.
It does. And you touched on it. in that last comment of the perception that you're moving to the cloud to be, that the cost considerations is a key driver, that it's going to be a cost savings. And as you noted, with the optimization, we can get you right size, but there's so much more value that the organization gains and can receive by moving to the cloud that shouldn't be the key driver. As you noted as one of the earlier slides, there are so many other benefits and attributes that organizations can achieve by taking this process and starting with the assessment so they understand what's in their environment, what they need to move, then how do you right size it, and then how do you take advantage of tools such as our, Veeam powered backup for it, our monitoring, and everything else to really make your organization more efficient, more secure, and get the performance and flexibility that you need.
Not to steal the thunder, I'll just add a little color on that. A lot of times, what we see with this is what Greg touched on is the migrations to clouds typically are what we call a lift and shift, right? Everybody just picks up the VM or the physical server as it exists on-prem and shift it to Azure. And that works, right? That gets it up and running, but that doesn't get into that cost optimization. And that's where Greg was saying, like, as you run that workload in the cloud, you guys can look at it and see, is there a way to optimize this, right? Because that's really the benefit. The lift and shift part's not really what's getting you cloud enabled, right? It's that looking at it and say, okay, what can we do now that it's up here? We've had the visibility of looking at it and seeing, yep, this is how it's running. This is what it's doing. How can we optimize it to run better in the cloud and run more cost efficiently? So great point, Greg, on that as well. And I just wanted to add that piece.
No, I think that's an important point to double down on. Then the final item, I just wanted to come back, and we told you at the beginning who DataPrize was, but just reiterating the fact of we believe that for these types of services, we're the only partner that you will need. And much of that comes from our cyber first stance, but then our ability to not only provide you the business resilience protection services that you need from DRaaS and BaaS to also then supporting your organization wherever they are within their cloud journey. And then beyond those components of our ability to support end users and provide, fully managed services to organizations. So hopefully we've touched on some key points throughout this conversation that have given you guidance as you're thinking about how you either move to Azure, or once you're there, you protect your workloads that are there and your data. And then additionally, how you protect your Microsoft 365 data, and why, if you are not fully doing that, it is imperative that you do. So with that, I want to thank Greg and Marty for joining me in this conversation, and all of those who are on the call, and we will open it up to questions. Thank you.
All right, great presentation, great discussion. I learned so much. I know the audience did as well. I've just brought up a poll question for everyone out there. We want to get your feedback regarding the question on the screen, which says, what additional information would you like about the DataPrize and Veeam solution? Maybe you'd like just additional technical details. Maybe you'd like to hear about other customers. Perhaps you'd like pricing details, or maybe you want to just try this out for yourself or get a personal demo. We do want to get your feedback. Feel free to select more than one answer there. And I'm bringing back in our expert presenters now, and we're going to take your question. So if you have a question about this solution you've been learning about here on the webinar, now is the time to ask. We've got lots of great questions rolling in already. I'm going to go ahead and start with this question from Matt out there in the audience. He's asking, can we specify which cloud vendor we store our backups with, or do those have to be stored in Azure? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take that. This is Marty. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, you can. So there are ways that we can do that with Veeam. So the appliance that runs in Azure that does the Azure native snapshots and Azure native backups will store it in Azure Blob, and also can actually put it in Blob Archive or Blob Cold. But then when we combine that with the Veeam backup and replication server component that typically runs on-prem, we're able to do a backup copy job of that blob storage to another target. So, and that could be Dataprise's environment or some other cloud vendor if you wanted to, for example.
Got it. Yeah, I like that flexibility. That's great. Let's see, here's another good question. This one's for you, Greg. They're asking, how are backups provided by Dataprise and Veeam better or more competitive than backups already offered natively in Microsoft 365?
Yeah, so with Veeam and Dataprise, the difference is from a 365 perspective, is we have the ability to do longer term retention, right? So out of the box, 365 has there's a retention policy they have. With Veeam, I can actually make that much longer. So for example, maybe in the healthcare space, I've got a 7-year retention I need. And with Veeam, I can set that up so I do store that data for 7 years. Even if the user leaves the company, I can still have their backups. Whereas with the Microsoft, I want to get rid of that account. I want to turn that account off. I lose that account information once I do that and I disable that account. So the longer term retention, the ability to choose specific things based on roles of the organization. For example, my C-suite, I may need to back them up and store them for a longer period of time or more frequently, right? Maybe I need to back up my C-suite users, 6 times a day. And my regular users maybe 2 or 3 times a day. So I have that granular flexibility with those Veeam backups.
Excellent. Yeah, that's important to understand what really makes this solution different, because there are a number of different options available in the market. Another question here. Let's see, this one, I think this one's probably for you, Marty, as well. They're asking, how does Veeam make sure that the backup data is good? What can Veeam do in that regard to ensure that the data that is in the backup that we're considering restoring is going to be valid data and also doesn't contain perhaps some sort of malicious information?
Yeah, so Veeam can do that a couple of ways. So I'll kind of give you 2 short ones. The one with the inside of Azure, when I do the recovery back, so say for example, I'm doing an Azure snapshot and I like recover it back into Azure, I can actually recover back into Azure disconnected from not have a network connection basically. And that allows me to then scan it, right, with a scanning tool that I would have to have in that guest at that point in time. So unfortunately, in that situation, I would have to have the tool inside that machine. The other way that I can do it, again, going back to combining it with the on-prem and that hybrid approach, the on-prem backup has a thing that we call Sure Backup, Sure Recovery. They kind of branded it Data Labs as well, because that allows me to actually boot up that machine in an isolated network. And then I can use a scanning tool through the Veeam server itself. And we have plugins and integrations with multiple different security vendors that you can plug into that and scan that machine before you actually do the full-on recovery.
And just following on to what Marty just covered, that is something that Dataprise has incorporated into the service that we have for our clients. So as Marty touched on, organizations that aren't working with a third party like Dataprise could do it independently, but the process that he outlined is how we follow it to ensure that, we certainly don't want to recover something that is infected in any way that could hurt the data. So by doing it offline, scanning it with various tools, we're able to provide assurance there before we restore it back into the environment.
Smart. I like that. And then here's another good one for you, Marty. I think they're asking what it would take, or what does Veeam do to protect the backup data itself to ensure that that backup data doesn't somehow get encrypted such that it's not even recoverable?
Oh, that's a great question. We just released our next version for protection for Azure, which now gives us the ability to do immutability in Azure blob storage. So up until this latest release, we were not able to do immutability in Azure. So now we do have that capability. So we can actually create that blob storage with an immutable backup and store it there, which basically is that worms type of storage, right? I can set that policy that says that backup is not modifiable. I can't touch it. The other thing is, and I go back to the presentation, which is a great function as well, and a great reason to partner with a service provider like DataPrize, is the cross account, so that I can have my Azure account as the company, and then I can have the service provider use the service provider account to do the backups, which is a completely separate account, so that if me as the customer, my account got compromised some way, shape, or form, the backups actually reside in a different account, which maybe wouldn't be compromised. So not only do I have that immutability capability, but I have the option as well to have it sit in a different account.
Nice. That's awesome. What about getting started with this? What would that take if someone was interested in trying this out, doing a proof of concept? Mary Beth, what would it take to get started with this?
Well, the first step would be reaching out to us, which I'm sure will make it easy for everyone. And then on our side, it's easy for us to do an assessment to understand what the environment looks like, what you're looking to protect, and then determine, where we start. We obviously talked about a couple of different strategies that organizations could follow, whether you're looking to protect your data in Azure, whether it's M365, or separately, you need assistance with your migration journey. Each one of those has a slightly different approach that we follow, but the first step is reaching out, and one of our solution consultants can help get started with whichever one of those paths you want to follow.
Yeah. And can I add on top of that? I mean, obviously, it's great to work with a provider because, again, there's all kinds of security implementations along the way, and they have those details. From a simplistic standpoint, if you wanted to just get started, Veeam does allow you to protect a certain number of workloads for free. So you could actually go out to the Azure Marketplace, deploy the Azure appliance from Veeam, back up a couple of workloads for free so you can get a taste of it, kind of like doing like a little POC thing. But again, that's on you to do that. And so, you would need to make sure you set up all the policies and procedures and stuff like that to make it work. So I always recommend definitely getting some assistance, but you can do that to get started. It's kind of like play with it a little bit, give you like a little teaser. It's like having the free food out there on the hand to give you a little teaser to get you to come in.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you make a great point. Installing Veeam, I'm sure that can be done in a few clicks of a mouse, but having a provider like DataPrize who's had the wisdom in the experience in the market and who has the playbook to really make this successful and look at the big picture, come up with a plan, analyze what you're trying to protect, what your goals are. I mean, that's really, really invaluable. So it looks like we're out of questions and we're starting to run out of time here in today's webinar. What's the next step, Mary Beth? If folks are interested in this, what do you recommend they do?
Yep. So I think the next step is just reaching out, and I'm sure post this, we will get them contact information so we can engage with them and support them how they need.
Excellent. All right. Well, Mary Beth, Greg, and Marty, thank you so much for being on the webinar today.
No problem. Thank you. And thanks to all the attendees for coming in and listening to us today.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to DataPrize and Veeam for joining us on the event today and making this possible. I do want to remind everyone before you go, don't forget about the handouts tab right there. There are 3 different resources available for download. One on making the case for the cloud, how to convince leadership that it's time to migrate. Another one on the DataPrize Azure Foundations. And then finally, the DataPrize Fully Managed Cloud Edition. If you just click on each one of those, that'll download that PDF locally to your computer, and you can check it out after the event ends. Make sure you grab those resources before you go. And of course, if you haven't responded to the poll, I encourage you to do that now. Last chance, check the box there to get your own personal demo. I'll just leave that up while I announce the winner of our Amazon $250 gift card. Let's see, this is going out to Peter Trudeau from Massachusetts. Congratulations, Peter Trudeau from Massachusetts, and we'll also be contacting our Best Question Prize winner as well. I hope everyone learned a lot on the webinar today. Make sure you're staying safe and keep your data safe. I encourage you to visit dataprise.com and veeam.com for more information, and have a great day. Bye-bye.